Welcome to Ask Dr. Change. I'm Dr. Linda Ackerman Anderson. I'm happy to have you join me today to explore how to seriously uplevel your leadership and consulting to transformational changes, all through conscious change leadership. Welcome. I have the pleasure today of spending time talking with Ali Juma, who is the head of the Inner Game of Change Institute and also the host of the Inner Game of Change podcast, something to tune into. Ali, tell us a little bit more about yourself before we dive in.
Thank you very much, Linda, and so good to be with you. And congratulations on all the work that you've been doing and your contributions. I'm a big fan of your work, so I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to talk to you and to your audience. Ali Juma is my name. I live in Australia, down under, obviously. And I live my life currently day in, day out, thinking about how I can contribute to society in my own simple ways. And change and adoption and lived experience and the human dignity and confidence, all of these things that just occupy my head on a daily basis, not as part of my job, but I think about it as part of my endeavor. I am on a journey, on a mission. And I do have the podcast, The Inner Game of Change. I strongly believe that it is a game and we need to understand it at a deeper level. And as well as nowadays, I am fully occupied by this exciting change that is happening around us, which is artificial intelligence, which I hope we can cover during the podcast. So that's what I do.
Wonderful. Well, from what I understand, your emphasis on the human dynamic, the inner game, so to speak, is a critical focus in the context of supporting organizations and people and society to make changes. So how do you bring in the human dynamic when you're in the midst of supporting a major change effort? What does success look like for you?
Yeah, before I jump to the success, I just want to mention a couple of things, Linda, is that for me, change is not really an organizational event. It is a human experience shaped by identity, confidence, and dignity and context as well, as you mentioned. I think if you could look at history, the Industrial Revolution, the migration, all of these things, they're all human experiences that changed the world and our context and our lived experiences. And so how I come about it in any way, I don't look at it really as a certification or like I go through a program, and I do not have a problem with these programs, but I come at it from my own lived experience. I'm a migrant and I went through change through many places in my life, and I adapted and I thought about the new norms, and I lived my own little experiences on a daily basis. And so that's how I come. This is my approach to when I think about change. And therefore, when I talk about success, is really, success over the years change in my mind, depending on the context. But currently, if somebody says, as a result of the work you were doing with me and helping me and supporting me and servicing me, and so I strongly believe in the principle of serving others, if the conversation moves from, I can't believe that I can do this now, for me, that is really a great signal of success, is that somebody's dignity has been protected. Confidence has been really supported and encouraged. And there's a positive shift in the way people think about things. And so that's what really success is for me. And that's what my mission, people talk about metrics and rollout and all of that. To say it in a very, ordinary way, at the end of the day, to be honest, who cares Who cares if you complete a plan and all of that? What we care about is that have we improved that human experience? Have we made somebody's life easier or less stressful, perhaps? And I'm really inspired by experiences like, you probably in your audience know about the Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I mean, success was adaptation. Change for them was survival and adaptation and all of these things. And whilst in our life is not as dramatic as that, however, it's still important. So if we make a shift in the way people feel about themselves in the workplace and outside, then for me, that is a success.
Great. Well, I want to ask you, so is your mode of service coaching one-on-one? Are you working with individuals inside of organizations? Are you working with leaders to help support the human experience? What form is your work taking?
You see me at every corridor, at every angle. I strongly believe that you need to have those conversations at every level. And change is there's a term that I use, which is you're gonna have to have two things happening. You're gonna have to have an organizational change empathy towards change, which is highly influenced by leadership. And you've got another lens, which is you have to have an employee change empathy towards change, which is the employee would need to have an open mind and curious enough to really understand that change. So I play at all of those levels. I'm grateful for the fact that I can have conversations with an executive or a CEO about their role, and I can have a conversation with a user about their role. And I think me being in the middle of, and there's this space in the middle, which I call the messy middle, where the middle management and these warriors that really translate strategy into what that actually means for their teams. I'll give you an example. Heavily, currently, I'm involved in enabling organizations and my clients making sense and adopting artificial intelligence. Yeah. I work with the leaders to help them understand their roles and the space they need to offer for their people to learn and explore, and the direction and the safety they need to offer, and what that actually means for them in terms of their behaviors and decisions. But I also train employees on how to use a generative AI platform, how they make sense of a prompt, why summarizing a document is not the ultimate thing, is what you're going to do with the summary, and is that going to influence the way you think about your work? So can you see that? And then I work in the middle with helping the middle management understand their daily work and how they need to offer support and offer permission for experimentation. So it's an orchestrated, level of work and very sophisticated. And that gives you the level of complexity when it talks about change. It's not as you and your audience would know. Yeah. It is not a straightforward line. It's very messy. But it's a beautiful once you move the needle.
Yeah. So a couple of questions. So with your focus on the human experience, that in contrast with AI being the technical experience, how do you see the interface and how do you ensure both really are optimized in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. The change is really not the technology. That's how I see it anyway. I've been living in this space for the last 3.5 years. And I say lived, meaning I'm deep into the rabbit hole. And the change is that, I'll give you an example, Linda. And I shared that example in a recent business setting. The setting of a university in the medieval times, there were no lecturers. There were just books. In fact, some of these books were chained to desks, and because there were scarcity and rare number of books, the printing was not there. Printing machine was not introduced. And so you've got this constraint where students want to learn more, but then you don't have a lot of books. And so the principle of a lecture was introduced as a workaround around that constraint. So a lecturer, the actual origin Latin word for the word lecture is lectura, which is basically reading a book. Uh-huh. So we introduced the lecturer. Nowadays we call them professors and all of these guys. The origin of the work is that they actually literally will hold a book and read it, and the students will start writing their own notes, or actually some of them will copy exactly what the lecturer is giving them. So that was the constraint at the time. So, unfortunately, or fortunately for some, but for me, that whole model of the lecture and all of that has been challenged completely, for example, now by artificial intelligence. And maybe it is time to rethink that. Unfortunately, the constraint has gone away, which is a printing machine was introduced, but the workaround stayed the same. And that was a problem. That is actually a design problem. And for whatever reason, people protected that model. If we fast forward, I see AI the same way. AI is introduced in a context where things like drafting and analyzing are all being done by humans. And now we're introducing a capability, and I don't call it a technology, it's a capability that can do all of these things for you. So it's going to remove a constraint for you. And that is going to be the beautiful tension between how can I let go of certain things and I can collaborate with the capability so I can make better decisions. And perhaps if we are ambitious enough, we become even better thinkers. And so that's why I see the tension between technology and human. I do not see it as a threat at all. Yeah. I see it as a complementary. In fact, my personal experience, I can service my clients better, I think better, and I collaborate with the technology on a daily basis. So that's how I see it, as enriching my service to society. Yeah. That's how I see it. But so if some people want to look at it as a threat, we need to understand where that threat is. And one of the things that I've been highlighting recently is that the most important thing, so going back to the example of the lecturer, now this capability is being introduced. And so a lecturer, the first resistance to it, not really because OpenAI and Microsoft, took a lot of public information and then they actually trained their models. If you dig a little bit deeper, you will understand that the what comes across as a resistance from a lecturer is actually an identity concern. Yeah. A lecturer has got knowledge, and generative AI has got all of that knowledge.
One of the things that jumps out at me from what you're describing is that you take what AI might produce and do something with it based upon your own experience, your own context, your own deliverable. You do whatever analysis or agreement with or repositioning of what you've gained. For me, the interface is ensuring that individuals don't swallow whole and think whatever AI gives me is it. But they continue to participate in the process using the value of what is generated through AI, but still adding their human experience, their intelligence, their ability to think and analyze and decide to the interaction.
There's always a higher purpose to everything. So, and exactly right, what you just, how you articulated that. You can summarize a document. That's cool. What are you going to do with that summary? Will it turn into insight? And then can that insight help the organization make better decisions? That's what we aim for. And that is an art. Okay, so there's a lot of things that I'm promoting now is that Dr. David Rock, who is an Australian and he manages in New York, manages the an Institute for Neuro Leadership. He talked at Davos.
Yes.
He talked at Davos recently, and I just listened to him the other day, and I might be butchering his words, but he talked about that we need better thinking to think about AI. And Linda, thinking is not easy, and that's why I moved now into, can we make even thinking easier by looking at things like design? Mm-hmm. And so design is another area where I see the world is going forward into. And I think change management in my head, one of the directions is going to go is actually we become designers of change adoption.
Yeah. Say more about the design experience, the design necessity, the process.
So historically, when electricity was introduced, and if you dig deeper into history, really, factories and all of these places did not really take advantage of electricity maybe 10, 15 years later after it was introduced. Because at the time when it was introduced, factories were designed based on steam engines and all of that. So they could not really take advantage of the technology. Only they were able to take advantage when they redesigned all of their processes around electricity and utilizing electricity. And that's where the progress has happened. That's where the success started to show up. Productivity, efficiency, and all of these things. And I see the same with AI. So you've got this capability that sits with you. Our design currently is designed everything around our current processes. And as I mentioned, if there's a capability that is going to come next to you and say, hey, Linda, I can do this for you. In fact, I can do it way better and faster. But you're still the human, we still need your judgment. Yeah. And which means I need to let go of certain things. But if I let go, my current structure and design does not allow me to do that because the business still depends on me to do certain things. So we're talking to the leaders now and say, you're not going to, if you're going to continue patchwork of an add-on of a capability, you may get maybe 5% of the advantage, if that. The challenge for all organizations in the next 10 years is to redesign all of their workflows. Can you actually imagine how massive that is?
Yeah.
So then you can have an ecosystem where you collaborate with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
But currently it's an add-on. The other thing is that if I can give you two examples, and I'm not wedded to either, but there's a difference between OpenAI, generative AI, ChatGPT, for example, and Copilot in Microsoft. One of the advantages for Copilot, it sits within the already existing system. So that is a design advantage for Copilot. It actually sits where you've already been doing the work.
Right.
And adoption is easier to look at Copilot because it's there. And the other thing, when you work with Copilot, the win is already there. The win and the outcome will have an immediate impact on the work you're already doing. You work already in Word documents and PowerPoints and Excel and all of these things, and Teams and Outlook. And so the design becomes, the winners in the game of change in the future is that those people who will design capabilities that will be easier for people to use, and it sits within the work. On a Tuesday morning, and when you're busy and you're, or Monday morning, and then everybody's saying, timelines and milestones and targets and deadlines, the winners in the capability are those that we can rely on in the moment of pressure and stress.
Yeah.
But if I need to leave this application and then I need to go somewhere else and pick up another application, that's a tension, that's a friction that will not make the experience easy. And that's why I talk a lot about the design. James Clear written the book, I'm sure you're familiar with it, Atomic Habits.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentions something which is really wise. And he says, we do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't matter what ambition you have.
Mm-hmm.
If your system is not designed to support you with that, you can dream, basically.
Yeah. So here's a design challenge. I'm working with a client. One of their initiatives is to create a community of practice and a center of excellence around AI. How would you advise them to create a center of excellence around AI from a design perspective?
Really not in announcements and not in PowerPoint slides and not on paper. They look great.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, and again, this is through my lived experiences, and I never call them a community of practice. I call them the AI learning circle.
Yes.
They just want to come and learn.
Yes.
And share practices.
Yes.
And even that idea of sharing is not easy because when you share something, you're actually sharing part of your identity, and you need a lot of permission, space, and confidence to be able to do it. And sometimes we need other people to promote other people. So it's a tricky business. What I advise is that it's not about an announcement. It's about creating those little small movements. For example, I have trained myself around 1,000 people, and although I'm not in the business of training, but I chose to be in that experience to train people. And at the end of each training session, I invite them, and it's optional for them to choose to join a learning circle.
Mm-hmm.
And Linda, over a period of 6 months, I've got 900 people. It wasn't mandatory. Yeah. It wasn't announced. It wasn't lots of nudges. No, people realized out of those workshops that perhaps I need to learn a little bit more.
Yeah.
So,
very hungry to learn. Absolutely.
That voluntary movement, that gives you a lot about how people move through change, not announcements.
Yeah.
Announcements are fun and all of that, but you and I and your audience will understand that the real work lives in the details of every day.
So what functions, what capabilities, what support systems would you design in to an AI center of excellence?
Quite a few things. First of all, we need this alignment between leadership and the ambition and what people are actually wanting to achieve. It is not people. There's a difference between access, adoption, and that third movement, which is basically a normalized practice.
Yeah.
And so, if leaders understand that, that is really a first critical step towards enabling people to understand that. Second thing is that adoption takes time. So I can give you access overnight, but if I expect a change in behavior, that will take months, if not years.
Yeah.
And so a highest level of patience would need to be exercised by leadership in here to be able to get to that level of behavior change.
So
and that is not an easy
you're
thing.
describing the change process, and I understand that, and that's useful. I'm asking what would be in the center of excellence. What kind of options would there be? What kind of skills are required to be developed? What kind of support systems would there be for people inside of a center of excellence?
Yeah, quite a few things. As I mentioned, you would need enabling leadership, that they understand that they need to offer that safety for people to come and experiment. You would need what I call learning facilitators. There's always going to have to be a level of coaching that would need to happen. For example, I'm working with a number of people now. They're tinkering with building their own agents. I coach them from the side, so I actually sit within that particular system. You would need some guardrails as well, so people would need to understand where the flags are and where they can swim. Currently, there's a lot of noise around their capabilities, so you need the clarity around the guardrails that happen within that particular center, and you need a level of transparency around how people are actually using their capability or experimenting with it. And that some of them will actually probably is going to happen every now and then, that some people will actually swim outside the flags, on the beach.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And that is fine, because that's part of the learning process. And then it's an organizational responsibility. So that's really an important thing. We should not outsource this just for the chief information officer or chief technology officer, or nowadays they actually introduced a chief AI officer. I call it nowadays, it's everybody's business.
Yeah, nice.
And there. And but that demonstration of evidence and what success looks like. And the other thing is that maybe I can share with you something that I've been experimenting with over the last 2-3 months. I've been highlighting within that center of excellence ways of thinking about the capability, and not just we saving 3 hours by using this.
Right.
We need to move beyond that. And if we influence the way people think about the capability and the potential, that is a long-term game. You're positioning your organization for a mature workforce.
Tell us more about the various ways, the specifics about the different ways you're asking people to think.
I don't. I catch the thinking that happens behind the scenes. Okay. I talk to these people about, walk me through what you're trying to achieve out of here. And I take it and I actually amplify it to the community. This is a good way to think about it. I'll give you an example. I talked to a manager that manages a business in regional Victoria, which is one of the states in Australia. The regions are always behind in technology from the cities, behind the cities always. And I think that's sort of a universal thing. When I talked to her for half an hour over coffee around the potential, and she started to tinker with it, and she watched a couple of my videos, she came back and she's thinking, how I'm trying to think about how I can use this to upgrade my community, literacy in AI. And so we sort of workshopped the idea, and then all I was trying to do here is really encouraging her not to jump at the solution, but to think this through and be inspired. 2 weeks later, she's introduced the whole program. She went and, created a partnership with a local council, and they asked me to actually run AI education sessions for their unemployed community, for their new migrants that, they arrive in there. So can you see, that is a way about thinking about the capability, not just I'm summarizing, I'm using a prompt.
Yeah. Right. And so really going for context and outcome, what we're attempting to achieve, and then what are all of the options that will enable us to move in that direction.
And that is the inspiration, is that if we inspire, as I mentioned before, going back to my original point, is that success is when we touch that nerve in somebody's way of thinking about it, and then you leave it, because then you actually helping them get, I mean, you're always going to be a coach. And that's what I mentioned before, is that one of the roles for practitioners in the business of change and engagement is that you need to become a coach.
Nice.
And look, the idea of managing change is I mean, I have a question mark. Do we really manage change? But that's another point for me. But if you can become a coach, and can you inspire somebody about the change they're actually going through, whilst protecting their identity? So think about that manager in the regions.
Yeah.
Now their confidence has shot through the roof. They see meaning and value in the work, and they're going to see the success in the community. That's an amazing progress in there, rather than, oh, Ali, I used the prompt and has written me a PowerPoint pack. I'm not belittling that exercise, but what I'm saying is that there's a doctor in Australia who inspired me with a statement that I was at his business event maybe 15 years ago, probably more than that. And he said, change is not the goal. The goal is the goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it changed everything.
Yeah.
And actually where I stole my idea of the inner game of change is come from Tim Galloway, who has written book of the inner game of tennis, the inner game of golf.
Yes.
And I adopted that philosophy fully, that it's not the act, it's actually what happens after that and what happens after that. If you're in government and you introduce a new policy is a change to the community.
Yes.
It's not the policy. The change is not is that, what that impact on society and the community will be. Absolutely. And as a result of that, what we expect to happen.
So you mentioned to practitioners to be more coaches. Other advice I want to ask you two sides to this question. Advice to practitioners who are supporting their clients to make changes to reach new goals. And then after that, advice to leaders who are change leaders, helping their organizations to evolve. So first, change practitioners.
There's an older principle I want to bring back to, I adore simplicity. I think simplicity is really sophistication. You don't need models. You don't need a lot of things. They are important, but remember, models are based on, conventional wisdom. And if you actually dig deeper into them and the human behavior, there's a principle in Japanese business improvement. It's called go to Gemba. Gemba is the flow factory. If you want to understand change and understand what happens, stay close to the real work, especially nowadays in the age of AI. You need to be, so my first point of advice for practitioners is that be curious, be interested, get your hands dirty, go and see the real work. You cannot influence change by sitting behind a screen. And I don't have a problem with sitting behind a screen, but you can have a conversation with somebody who is doing the work by showing you the work even through the screen. So that's fine. So that's really important. Stay close to the work. And the other thing is that if you're going to be able to have any saying in the design for small, repeatable behavior changes. And this is why we say be be there early at the start of designing a change and the start of the cycle of project and all of these things. That's why they say get a seat at the table early in the piece. That's one of the advantages, that he can have a say in the design of what behavior would need to look like.
How about the process? How about the process of making
back to my point is that you look at the system, you design the system for the behavior change. Yeah. And that's where we actually say, can you find a way to enable a change, a small change that can be repeatable over a long period of time? Mm-hmm. And the third thing is that whilst you're doing this, which is really an important piece, and I don't think it's been spoken a lot about, can you, in the process, protect human dignity? Nice. Every time we let go of an old norm, we let go of a level of confidence and competence, our dignity and our identity is threatened. Yeah. And so how can you wash through all of that? How can you make sure that my identity is protected? I am working now with a number of academics in 3 universities. My number one mission every single day is that, you are more than your knowledge, and you've got judgment, and that judgment has been built over years. That is your identity, and that's your dignity, and my job is actually to protect it.
Yeah. Marshall Goldsmith years ago put out a statement which we found actually to be challenging, and that is it your choice to be smart or to be effective? And very interesting how, those of us who have been in generating ideas and contexts and models and methodology and all of that, how smart we are and how effective.
I love it. I love this. I love this, Linda, and I really love it, and I've got goosebumps with me. There's a scene in penalty shootout in soccer and football, and so the player is coming to the area where he's going to have the penalty, and it's actually a very critical penalty shot. And without giving you the outcome now of what happened when the player just stepped into the box to actually make a decision, because hitting a ball and trying to score is a decision.
Yeah.
And so later he had a conversation with his coach, and he said, I really want to score this. And so the coach said to him, you need to start thinking about how to manage moments like these rather than that particular goal.
Yeah.
So you need to manage yourself and the way you think about it, rather than I am desperate for that particular goal. So sometimes you will miss a goal, but you will be mature in the process. That's what Roger Federer talks about all the time. Yes. It is, can you manage the moments, and can you be effective in the moment, not the action?
Yeah, which has direct relationship to the other side of my question, your advice for leaders who are orchestrating transformations of whether it's an organization or a community. What advice, what guidance would you give?
Really simple. Again, I'm a simple man. This particular change around artificial intelligence, and leaders gotta have to understand that this is a huge change. Like when somebody says, for example, I am scared this is gonna take my job. That is not a simple, easy thing. That is a human thing, and it's a very deep threat to our identity and our livelihood. So a leader cannot just, in the traditional way, if we're gonna roll out a software, they have no idea. Say, I don't like the details. I'm just gonna make a decision. This is the time when we say to the leader, you actually need to know the details. And this is why what I've done, for example, myself, every single organization I worked with, I train the leaders the same I train the users, but I say to them, you're not the target user. However, I need you to understand what your people are going through. So that's one. First one is that get close to the details. And the second thing is that offer people that space to learn. You cannot expect, and again, we used to talk about that in theory in the past, but 9 out of 10 times nobody abides by that, because we run people through a workshop of a training, and then they go back to their desk, and then all of a sudden 20 emails are waiting for them. So they actually get sucked back into the messy environment of work. So now the second advice to the leaders is that allow people to the space to learn and explore and experiment. Nice. And that will need to be part of the design of the adoption process. This may slow down your processes, the existing ones, but sometimes we need to slow down a little bit to go faster later. And that's and this is going to be, because time is a cost, obviously, for leaders. So this is a big challenge for leaders in the way they think about what cost is and what opportunity is.
Yeah. Go slow to go fast is a motto that we use.
It's on the highway. I don't know about America, but in here on the right-hand side on the highway, if you just want to go and overtake somebody on the right-hand side, you can't, because there's a barrier next to you. So what do? You slow down, you go to the left, and then you go faster. So sometimes you need to slow down to go faster.
Absolutely. Ali, this has been very, very rich, very filled with your experience. I appreciate it very much. Any last thoughts that you would share with our audience, whether about AI or the inner game of change, as you're so passionate about?
I think it will be fantastic for anybody living in this world. There's a couple of things. Stay curious and be kind to yourself. Take time. Stay a little bit longer in whatever you've got of, change happening in your world, because that little bit longer, who knows? But that level of curiosity, dial it up a little bit and stay kind to yourself and give yourself a space and permission to say, I'll have a go and see what happens. You're not going to lose a lot. So if I can leave anybody with that, I think that will be really fantastic.
It is fantastic, especially for those of us who are very busy. So craft designing space into our lives.
Yes. Well, busyness is a reflection of design. And I don't want to, again, I don't want to theorize and patronize people about it, but it's not an easy thing. Change is not an easy thing. And because it's not an easy thing, wouldn't it make sense to spend a little bit of time to understand it?
Absolutely.
And especially nowadays in the age of distractions, social media, the influx of information, how can you stay kind, curious, and open without being too much distracted by what's happening out there?
Yeah, beautiful. Ali, thank you so much. And I invite our listeners to tune into your podcast, The Inner Game of Change. I have appreciated this time, learned a lot. Thank you so much for your experience with AI. I think it's really, absolutely important in this day and age. I appreciate it.
Pleasure, Linda. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope you gained some valuable insights for your work. Please send me your questions and challenges by going to askdrchange.com.